Monologue, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton and former Deputy Assistant to the President, Fox News National Security Strategist Sebastian Gorka. Dr. Gorka, there's so much to unravel here on so many different levels. And what we're really beginning to see is that more and more there's evidence that this goes back to the Obama administration. And even the president knew. The Susan Rice memo to self is very revealing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so transparent. It simply talks to, the ability or the inability to be subtle about a cover-up when you're no longer the national security advisor. Let me just make one comment. I was listening to your monologue, and something occurred to me listening to the last segment. Robert Mueller was empowered to do what? To investigate whether there was collusion, whatever that is, between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Rod Rosenstein press conference last week started with what statement, Sean? There is no evidence that despite what Russia did, there was any effect on the election. That's how he started. So what are we talking about? Why are we spending millions of dollars? The Kremlin are bad guys. Vladimir Putin, the former KGB officer, I get it. But if you start with the assertion nothing happened that changed the election, then why don't you dissolve the whole office of the special counsel?
Look, that should have happened a long time ago, and he should never have been allowed to put this abusively biased team together. Tom, let me read you something. This is from the DOJ's announcement from last Friday when they actually went out and said, when they said the indictment includes 8 criminal counts and criminal conspiracy to defraud the U.S. The defendants allegedly conspired to defraud the U.S. by impairing the lawful functions of the FEC, the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Department of State, in administrating federal requirements of disclosure for foreign involvement in certain domestic activities. I want to ask this in relation to Russia's point, which I thought was brilliant, which was, wait a minute, if they would have done it in this particular case, that means Hillary, that means Fusion, that means Christopher Steele, that means everyone else would have, the same standards would have applied. So while they talk broadly about it in the indictment and they mention it in their press release, that's not what they were charged with. Do you see that that was done purposely?
Yeah, I think it was a fundamentally dishonest document designed to distract from the fact that the Russia collusion allegations against Donald Trump are collapsing, and the reason for being of the Mueller investigation is disappearing. And you've got, in many ways, the Obama administration reacted appropriately to what the Russians were doing, as alleged in this indictment, because they were having an immaterial impact on our public policy process. They should have been told to stop messing around, which evidently they were. But they weren't spending a lot of money, and they were having zero impact. But on the other hand, they were also messing around significantly by trying to destroy Donald Trump through this dossier leaking through Russian intelligence services to the Clinton campaign that laundered it into the Obama DOJ and FBI. And rather than respond appropriately and protect Mr. Trump from this smear effort by the Russians, they used it as a pretext to target and spy on him and his team. That is where, that's the scandal, and the fundamentals of that scandal haven't changed with this press release / indictment last Friday. That's going to go nowhere.
But yeah, that was a political document to me, that indictment, because they know they're not going to arrest any of these people. But your point is well taken. There is Russian interference. There was. And Hillary Clinton's campaign in the DNC brought the Russians in, Dr. Gorka. They paid the Russians to be involved in this, short of the trolls, apart from the trolls. And why wouldn't the Russians think they can get away with it? After all, Vladimir Putin put his operatives in America, and they got 20% of our uranium. Why would they think anything else?
Look, there are categories from the Cold War, the useful idiot category. Michael Moore was a useful idiot when he shows up at that demonstration against Donald Trump that's been organized by the Russians. But we're not talking about useful idiots when it comes to the FISA court surveillance and the Steele dossier. Here, let's use a phrase from the military. Hillary Clinton, her lawyers and the DNC were force multipliers for Russian propaganda that attacked a presidential candidate during an election. They weren't unwitting. They actually paid for it. More than $12 million of Russian propaganda paid for and funneled into an illegal surveillance warrant against a U.S. citizen.
I got to roll. You guys have been doing amazing work. Keep up the good work. We need your voice every night.
And while critics are slamming the president for not condemning the Russian meddling, President Trump is also firing back, and he's blaming former President Obama. He tweeted that as well, saying Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election. So why didn't he do something about Russian meddling? Also, all of these pose serious questions, of course. Do these indictments, in fact, vindicate President Trump as he suggests? And how should America effectively retaliate against Russia? I want to bring in my panel now. Deneen Borelli, Fox News contributor, also CRTV.com host. Ford O'Connell, Civic Forum PAC chairman. Ned Ryan, American Majority CEO, and Emily Jasinski, a Washington Examiner commentary writer. Emily, you write about Washington, D.C. Everyone's up in arms about this, but for a variety of reasons. Certainly, we know so far that the Mueller probe has turned up no collusion. It has turned up no Americans. It has indicted no one in the Trump campaign. So is this a premature victory lap for President Trump?
He may see it that way, and I would say the enthusiasm with which he tweeted over the past few days would suggest that's the case. Of course, there's still things to be, worked out when it comes to Rick Gates, when it comes to Paul Manafort, when it comes to Carter Page. There are still things on the table, but I think what he's narrowing in and saying here is that when it comes to what is a hoax, it's the idea that his campaign was involved and that it wasn't, something where the Russians were out there doing what they're doing on their own without Americans getting involved in it.
Yeah, Ford. The mainstream media is so disingenuous, and I've seen President Trump address this on more than one occasion. Obviously, their whole narrative was that President Trump's campaign colluded with Russia, not that they meddled in our elections and any of that stuff. And so, to that degree, he's certainly been vindicated thus far, Ford.
No, he has. And I think the indictment was extremely good news for President Trump. But you have to understand something here, and that is that the Democrats and much of the mainstream media want to get Donald Trump, and they really don't care how they do it, whether they have to bend the truth or they have to lie. And frankly, President Trump is absolutely right to respond because you know what, Charles? Public opinion never sleeps. And unfortunately, if it says, there's no collusion, they're going to turn around and say, well, they interfered and somehow you had something to do with it. He has to shut them down at every turn. And unfortunately, it hurts his ability to govern the country because the Democrats are never going to accept the election results.
Ned, over the weekend, yesterday, Rush Limbaugh, he cautioned President Trump. He appeared on Fox News Sunday, and what he said was that by taking a victory lap, he could actually validate the whole process. I want to share this with you in the audience and then ask you about it.
I would be very careful if I were President Trump here. This is just one of many different areas the special counsel is investigating. The danger for the president is it would be very, I think, seductive for him to embrace this, totally embrace, say, see, I've been vindicated. The worst thing he could do in his world is to validate this whole investigation by claiming victory here.
Do you think there's some truth in that, Ned?
I do. I think that anything that Trump does to legitimize what I think is an illegitimate investigation with Mueller doesn't help his case. So I would agree with Limbaugh. I think the thing that's interesting, too, in this, Charles, a couple things. First of all, if these Russians who were indicted are guilty of conspiracy to defraud the United States, why is a former British spy by the name of Christopher Steele also not guilty of conspiracy to defraud the United States? And again, when he is authoring a fake dossier that was used as a weapon against Donald Trump, used by the FBI to secure a FISA warrant, how is he not also being charged with that as well? The other thing, too, that's amazing to me, Charles, is this disingenuous media not saying Trump isn't pushing back against Russia. Okay, I'm sorry he didn't tweet out something about pushing back against Russia, but when he's saying that we can have that Poland and the Czech Republic can have missile defense systems now, which, by the way, Obama pulled out in 2009 to appease Putin, when Trump is selling arms to the Ukraine, which frustrates Putin, and at the same time, when he has gone into Central Europe and Poland last summer and started talking about undercutting and undermining Russia's exports of oil and gas, which is 50% of the Russian government's revenue, I consider that very strong pushback against Russia.
You know, Deneen, I mean, it's obvious, and this is we talk about this all the time, that the mainstream media will never, say anything positive about this administration. But having said that, it puts a lot of pressure on President Trump to have to use the Twitter as a soapbox and bully pulpit. In this particular case, were you happy with the tweet storm that he went off with yesterday?
Well, listen, the way I see it is that the president is always on offense. And you mentioned the media will not report anything positive about the president. They don't want to talk about the fact that there has not been any facts coming out in terms of Russian collusion with Trump associates and Russia. What the president is doing is going to Americans directly with his tweets, with his messages, because the media will not do so. And the other thing is he is pointing out that the thumb was on the scale in terms of Hillary Clinton with the election and with the FBI individuals. So they let her off. Huma Abedin with her emails, what happened with that, and the opposition research dossier. All of this information the president is reminding Americans about.
You know, Emily, also, this whole thing creates a timeline that goes back to 2014. We had Adam Schiff over the weekend even acknowledge that the Russians were emboldened because of a lack of effort by President Obama after the Sony hack, that they saw, hey, this internet interference is the way to go, and the United States won't push back.
Certainly, we can revisit mistakes made under the Obama administration. And I think, Senator Bernie Sanders said earlier this weekend that, maybe there was something the Obama administration could have done differently when it came to interference in the election. And I think that is a question that is going to pick up traction in the coming weeks, because especially if it gets pushed by Republicans on the Hill and elsewhere, because it's a question that we actually would be served by having answers to, and wondering what could we have done then and what can we do coming up on these midterms, because they're not that far away.
There's no doubt this whole thing, Ford, has not gone the way that Democrats or the media expected it to when it was launched. It's getting long in the tooth, rather. And so far, 13 Russian indictments, not necessarily a lot to show for all of this. Where does it go from here?
Well, we don't know where it's going to go, because obviously Special Counsel Mueller has kept it close.